Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. Make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So apparently we have new intel dropping from these pollsters in the Election Mafia, and even they can't cover for their boy Joe Biden anymore. And his approval rating is plummeting. It's probably much lower than a lot of these polls actually have it at when you analyze these samples within the polls. And within the midterm electorate, it's probably going to be even lower than it is in reality, to the point where we have to ask ourselves the question, do Democrats even have a chance in 2022 at all? And what is Biden's real approval rating? How far is it falling? And I'm going to answer all of these questions and more. But first, this video would not be complete if I did not tell you guys about my good friends over at My Patriot Supply. Friends, it seems like big government and tech giants are trying to destroy America. Everything they touch turns into a disaster. Pretty soon the whole system will fall apart, and the first thing to fall is going to be the food supply chain. So do you have enough emergency food to get you through a serious long-term crisis where you can't even get food at the grocery store? Because most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. That's why the smart move now is to get long-term storage emergency food before things go bad. I highly recommend My Patriot Supply. They've served millions of American families and have over 41,000 4- and 5-star reviews. Their mission is your survival. And right now, you can save 25% or $75 on a 4-week kit of emergency food that will save the day, probably soon. Order a starter kit for each member of your family, and they'll ship everything quickly and discreetly to your door. Go to preparewithredeagle.com so you can claim your 4-week emergency food kit and save 25% in the process. Again, that's preparewithredeagle.com. So I am working currently on the video I wanted to do about Georgia, Virginia, and Colorado. My next documentary, we did the one on DeSantis, we did the one on Texas. We're going to be doing another one pretty shortly, probably early August it will be released. The script is going to be finalized later tonight after this video is up, and hopefully we can start recording and editing and working on it to get it out to you guys imminently. But in the meantime, we have to look at these polls because The Economist YouGov, which arguably was one of the best polls for much of Trump's presidency, typically was on aggregate, maybe a couple of points above aggregate, was perfect in the 2018 midterms for the approval poll that Trump had in the exit polling within the electorate. So either way, we could look at this and we could see the fact that they had a D+14 sample, and Biden still had just a 4% net advantage in approval rating. And this is happening throughout. And you can look at these polls as a whole. And a lot of them vastly overestimate Democrats. And we may see Republicans even have a partisan party ID advantage in the 2022 midterms, given the energy factor, given the energy levels. But even so, Biden had like a +20 approval, allegedly, probably lower than that when he took office in January. Eventually that +20 turned into +10, and now he's currently at around 45% of people disapproving in these polls. Personally, I think it's higher than that. I don't think his approval rating is even 50. It's probably like 46% approve and like 49% disapprove or something like that, and the rest are undecided or apolitical. But you look at this and you see the fact that his approval rating in the Election Mafia polling has dipped to roughly around, even, you could even say it's going to go below his total popular vote percentage pretty soon. It's roughly around that. And I mean, that's even going by their standards. Personally, I think it's much lower because you look at these polls and you see, Rasmussen has him underwater. That's expected, given Rasmussen does typically have a right lean. But overall, Economist, they oversample Democrats vastly, +4. Politico, Morning Consult, he's only +7. Civics is not included here. Civics, he's underwater. Reuters, which is an adults poll. Same thing with Gallup. Both of these are adults polls. They're not even, tracking if you're a voter. In many cases, you probably even have some non-citizens that are in these polls. And even Reuters, that's the only one that's really propping them up. Same thing with the Hill/Harris X. But even that poll was like, Biden was at like 63 a few months ago. Now he's at 58. So obviously, I like to discount those two, not because they don't fit my narrative, but because they're just completely horribly conducted polls. And I did a video on the Hill poll, and we analyzed that they were oversampling left-leaning independent suburbanites, and they were vastly oversampling Democrats and not even weighting properly. Same thing here with this Economist poll. Even when they, weighed it to a certain extent, it didn't really change the partisan advantage that Democrats had within the poll. But you look at this Biden's approval tanking, essentially, and that is a white pill. And you have the fact that Sinema and Manchin, and to a lesser extent even Mark Kelly, is holding up and blocking some of his legislation to the point where he's not able to get anything done in Congress. He is essentially a lame duck who can still get executive orders out there, especially if Republicans retake the House and retake the Senate, which we're going to get to in a second. But both of those things seem like they are going to happen at this rate. And you see Biden's approval falling. It's probably going to fall even more. But they can't even cover for their boy anymore. Their boy, missing Joe Hayden, as Trump said, or Jobalist Hayden is what I like to call him. But even when they conduct a horrendous poll, they still can't even make him look good at this point. That is the thing. The election mafia, they don't go away, and they're not going to go away. But I think a lot more people are waking up to the fact that it's just not true. And very few people voted for Biden because they like Joe Biden. I feel like a lot of the reason why he was able to, have a support base above 20% in the country is mainly because people voted more against Trump than they voted for Joe Biden. That doesn't necessarily mean that, somebody like Bernie Sanders would have done better in an election, because that's not entirely how these things work. But Joe Biden, he's probably the best the Dems can do, and they're not even voting for Biden. Now you have a record to compare Trump's to Biden's. You see inflation is skyrocketing. You see the fact that in many cases, the economy is stagnating, more so than you could argue that it would be if Donald Trump was still president. And that's the truth. And a lot of people know it. A lot of people are not willing to admit it, but a lot of people deep down understand it and they know it. So that's part one of this video. The election mafia's cringe continues. But part two of this video, we have to understand how it's going to be very difficult for Democrats to really do well next fall. And the midterms are going to be here sooner than we know it. I mean, California has their recall for 2021 in less than 2 months. And you have the Virginia and New Jersey gubernatorial elections in November. So there's going to be a lot of elections, and we have a special election, I think, next week in Ohio. There was an election last night. Yeah, the more establishment Republican won, but a lot of Democrats were crossing over in that runoff and voting for the more establishment Republicans. So it's kind of understandable how that took place. But beyond that point, we have to look at the fact that historically, especially when a president's approval is not, 75%, as we saw for Bush in 2002 or somewhere around there, but Democrats possibly could be in for pretty big losses in the House. And you could look at this here. This is 527 to 346, I think is what Trump called it. But either way you look and you see the average House losses for a midterm election is somewhere around 25 to 30 seats. And we could possibly see even more depending on turnout, depending on polarization, etc. And you could see this right here. And 2022 is going to be here essentially before we know it. And it seems as if Biden is tanking in the approvals compared to where he was. There's little sign of that changing. More people will essentially be removed from this Biden-Trump false dichotomy for the midterms, and the turnout on the Democrat side is not going to be as big if Donald Trump is also not on the ticket, and Republicans probably will be energized because that's what happens in midterms. The party that is out of power usually is in for some form of big gains most of the time. This is not going to be an exception. The House is arguably a foregone conclusion, but you have to analyze the Senate and the governorships as well. Obviously, Florida, again, probably going to go red. So Republicans need to win 4 of the remaining 7. You have Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Those are already red. They'll probably prevail in North Carolina. So they either need Sununu to run, or they need to win Georgia, or they need to win one of Arizona and Nevada. Again, fairly easy. I'd say Republicans have a 75+% chance at retaking the Senate. They probably have a 95% chance at retaking the House because they're only a few seats away, and historical trends favor them vastly. Governorships, they probably would have an opportunity to gain. They're going to lose Maryland, obviously, but where else are they exactly going to lose? I don't see anywhere. You look at Kansas, they could be in for a flip in Kansas. They probably hold Arizona. Maybe even if they do lose Georgia, they could flip Wisconsin. There's an opportunity in Pennsylvania. New Hampshire, even if Sununu does go for the Senate, Republicans did very well statewide in the 2020 election, despite losing at the national level by like 7 points or so, to the point where Republicans could even be favored, even if it is a slight favor, in that open seat in New Hampshire. So either way, I would expect Republicans to gain governorships. I would expect them to retake the Senate, and I would definitely expect them to retake the House. Now, that would put Biden's agenda essentially on life support. And you have to understand, even in this horrendous approval poll that we saw earlier, Hispanics, Biden is only plus 18 with Hispanics. He's only at 53% in this poll that overestimated Democrats in their sample. Biden is only plus 18 with Hispanics. Again, Hillary Clinton won Hispanics by, around 40 points. Now, Biden is not over water with them by 20, even in a Democrat-favorable sample, to the point where if Republicans got, 40% of the Hispanic vote in the midterms, that would send shockwaves to Dems because they'd be doing much better in Texas, much better in Florida. To an extent, even like the New Mexico governorship could be in play, and we saw a poll earlier in the month that actually had it tied. Now, I don't know if this is going to happen, but it all comes down to turnout. If conservative Hispanics turn out and liberal Hispanics don't, Republicans would do much better overall with Hispanics because it comes down to turnout. Same thing with independents. Biden underwater in this poll by 14 with independents, even in a Dem-favorable sample. Now, you need to look at this and you need to understand the basic fact that if right-leaning independents are more energized and more likely to turn out than left-leaning independents, because the inverse was true in 2018, then you could be in for an inverse 2018. And think about the Senate elections. Democrats held Senate elections in deep red states, West Virginia, Montana, Ohio. The only ones they lost Missouri, which was Trump plus 20, Indiana, which was Trump plus 20. They lost North Dakota, which was like Trump plus 30. And they lost Florida, which again is a swing state but is relatively immune to midterm waves. If you look at swing states such as Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Democrats swept the floor with Republicans in all of those states, and even Texas was pretty close. So you have to understand that the energy factor matters, and you could be in for 54 Senate seats for Republicans. You could be. Now, I think that's the ceiling, but I think you could be in for that. In terms of the House, they could gain 40 seats because the way that this trajectory is going for Biden, it's not exactly looking good. And because we know the way the election mafia is the way they are, that it's probably a lot worse for Biden than what this graph actually shows. So we will have to see what happens at the end of the day. But until then, Biden's trajectory is downward, and that is very good news for Republicans. Now, the other thing that we have to discuss is what Republicans are going to take office, because we don't want a bunch of weak, spineless, fake conservatives taking power either. And that's another discussion for another video, and I've covered that multiple times, and I'll continue to cover it, especially as we get closer to the midterms here. But overall, in the meantime, Biden not looking good, and that will affect the Democrats in the midterms. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Please like this video down below, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle, out.